Welcome to the first episode of Ethical Consumption, my new series on ethics and awareness of systems when making choices as a digital consumer. Of course, there is no ethical consumption under capitalism. What I'm recommending here is one or more of the best choices for use case given the present post-industrial mode of production within which we all live and suffer. Let's get started. For the first episode, I thought long and hard about the most obvious choice of topics and landed here, on internet browsers. Right now, far and away, the most popular internet browser is Google Chrome. And what with Google's insistence upon adding digital rights management to the whole damn internet, it seemed like a pretty good bet. Yes, I know, as of right now, Google's Web Integrity API has been defeated in theory, but you can guarantee that they'll be trying it again in the future once everybody's forgotten about it and they can be more quiet about it. So please keep your ears up. So yes, in this video we'll be talking a fair amount about Google. Actually, that isn't its real name. Its real name is Alphabet Incorporated, but that just sounds too evil for a company whose slogan used to be, "Don't be evil." So we don't really talk about that, because Google is enormous, and therefore is, in actuality, very evil indeed. Just how evil is it, Ferret, you may be asking? Well, apart from forming a digital monopoly in the 2000s that it has maintained ever since, its business model is based completely around data collection and advertising, meaning that it benefits enormously off of being free and, in the case of some of its projects, even open source. Because the more users it attracts by any means necessary, the more data it gets, the more eyeballs it gets, and therefore, the more money it makes. Like all big companies, their evasion stat is 100 when it comes to taxes as well, and there are consistent questions around its very much closed-source algorithms and their biases towards racist, sexist, and otherwise far-right ideas. They also own YouTube, so you know what? Why don't you run an experiment? Just go ahead and like any one of my extremely left-wing videos, and watch as your YouTube search results magically start advertising outright fascists. But anyway, Google supposedly started with these two nerds in some garage or something, right? They must have done some pretty awesome innovating and smart business stuff in that garage in order to get where they are right now, right? After all, they invented the search engine. Well, no they didn't. Search engines already existed long before Google did. But maybe they at least made internet browsing better? Nope, Firefox was in the game long before Chromium ever showed up. Well, in that case, what did they do that made them so successful? The one thing that Google did innovate was their search algorithm. Before Google, search results were based entirely on relevance. The more of your search terms a page had in it, the higher it would appear on your results. Google created PageRank, their patented formula for ranking sites by the number of other sites that link to them. Basically, it means that your search results would prioritize popular, well-known websites. Good, right? You get the best results first. Well, until you realize that the best results in this case are actually just the results that can afford to advertise themselves, whether through deals with other websites or even deals with Google themselves, which of course could just self-perpetuate, literally burying the competition. It's not hard to see why this would become extremely profitable for Google though. After all, their PageRank just made them into Fortune 500's best online friend. So in summary, Google has formed a monopoly by becoming the most profitable form of advertising for existing big capitalists, and has used that monopoly to mine, sell, and profit from people's data, and even, allegedly, to sway political opinion towards ideologies that benefit those big capitalists, all while presenting a colorful logo, "Don't be evil," and of course, exciting free software to the public who doesn't really want to think about it too hard. And now they're trying to DRM the internet. Right, forgot about that. So, if you didn't know what I was talking about earlier, in July 2023, about 5 months ago as of recording this, Google announced their plans for a Web Integrity API. There's lots and lots of videos out there on this, but essentially this API would encourage websites to limit or eliminate traffic to and from certain users, based on all number of things, in the name of security. They could make it so you can't access the website if you're Russian, or if you're using Linux or Mac OS, or if you're using any browser except for Google Chrome, or even unless you've paid another company to validate you as a real internet user. The possibilities are literally endless with this move, each one more nightmarish than the last. So much so that even other capitalists were decrying it as pure evil, and Google was already starting to build it into their Chrome browser. So now we finally arrived at the topic at hand. The Chrome browser is evil, and you shouldn't be using it for any reason ever again. What should you use? People are talking more and more about private browsers, ones that block ads and trackers from harvesting you for data online and other nasty stuff. And there are lots of options here. Firefox, Brave, Vivaldi, Google Chromium even comes to mind. And this is part of why I wanted to start the series. People act as if these browsers are all equal and it's up to user choice because they all respect your privacy well enough to be considered a privacy browser. For the individual, they're all good and valid choices, but for the internet and for society, they are not. So what we're doing here today is looking into why that is. For one thing, 3 of these browsers that I mentioned, those being Brave, Vivaldi, and Chromium, are all built on Chromium, which is owned and developed by Google. Yes, Chromium is open source, I know, and unlike Chrome, it doesn't contain heaps of code that funnel every little detail about you to Google. But that doesn't change the fact that all of these browsers will be impacted by Google's development choices for Chromium, which includes the Web Integrity API that is definitely still coming. When you make a protest move from Chrome to Chromium, Google rubs its pasty evil little hands together with glee because you've activated their trap card. You're still supporting their monopoly of the internet one way or another. You may not be feeding them data and ad-hungry eyeballs now, but you will. Oh ho ho, you will. Because if their API can successfully take over, eventually you'll have no choice. One thing that API can do is stop you from accessing websites, any website, if you're using an ad blocker or a tracker blocker, or any other privacy measure at all. That sound familiar? Something, YouTube blocking the ad blockers? Something, I heard about that somewhere. Anyway, you should avoid Chromium. But that's easier said than done, isn't it? Microsoft Edge? Chromium. Opera? Chromium. Discord? Okay, Discord isn't a browser, but I've got bad news for you. Yup, it's based on Chromium. Safari is its own thing, but it's also proprietary. And while it isn't as comically sinister as Google is, Apple Incorporated isn't any more trustworthy, and their browser does all the same shady privacy invading shenanigans as Google does. The fact of the matter is, it's really, really hard to develop a browser from scratch and to have it actually work everywhere in this day and age. Maybe if there was a large enough number of people who understood the threat posed by Chromium, there would be more developers coming together to work on an alternative, but there just isn't. The only other game in town, really, is Firefox. Specifically, the browser engine developed by Mozilla called Gecko. Gecko is open source and powers Firefox, Thunderbird, a bunch of other stuff. And all over, you see Firefox being heralded as the #1 solution to de-Google. But there's a problem with this. Mozilla gets most of its money from Google. Google doesn't own Mozilla per se, but Mozilla makes heaps of bucks from a sponsorship by Google. Why, you may ask? Well, let's install Firefox and see if we can figure it out. Alright, here we go. We're on Firefox. Let's go and do what we do on an internet browser, and we search something up, and it's taking me to Google. That's weird. Yeah, Google is the default search engine on Firefox, and Firefox gets paid an absurd amount so that they don't change this anytime soon. What's more though, Mozilla itself is becoming something of an advertising company. They don't really track you, at least not without you explicitly giving them stuff to track. Meet Pocket. Pocket is marketed as an easy little tool for you to stick away sites and content that are important to you, and then it recommends you more stuff that is related to the stuff that you've pocketed. And this new stuff being advertised to you, of course, isn't being pulled from relevancy ranked search results. No, it's a method of opt-in targeted advertising. And given what we've learned about where that leads, I don't think that's something we should really be all that thrilled about. So great, thanks Ferret, you're telling me that Firefox is already going over to the enemy. Whatever shall we do? Well, not all hope is lost. You see, even though Firefox gets all of Google's money, they don't use their API. That means if you use Firefox and take out Pocket, change your default search engine, do a bunch of other stuff to it to ensure that it respects your privacy properly like it says it does, you actually have a pretty decent browser that does not in any form kowtow to Google. This sounds like an awful lot of work, though, just to get an internet browser. But there are Firefox forks. Fireforks that already do this for you. One example you'll hear most about is LibreWolf. LibreWolf has totally stripped down Firefox and maximized its privacy and security settings, along with coming with uBlock Origin, which is a blocker for ads and trackers that you should be using no matter what browser you're running. Friends don't let friends browse without uBlock Origin, after all. So, LibreWolf is extremely private, extremely open source, and all in all, extremely ethical. The only issue you may have with it is that, with its extreme privacy settings, some sites just won't work very well. I find in particular sites with fillable forms, or sites that rely on knowing your time zone, don't work very well. Now, you can go in there yourself and turn off some of these privacy settings, or another Fire fork I like a ton is WaterFox. WaterFox was originally developed by some kid when he was like 17, and it continues to basically just be a stripped down Firefox with just a few privacy settings enabled. You know, the ones that are least likely to break stuff. Now, a little bit ago, there was some controversy when WaterFox was sold to System1, which is an advertising firm. But in contrast, no one seems to be talking about the fact that WaterFox is actually no longer owned by System1 as of 2023. So, even if you're a hardcore anti-capitalist like me, WaterFox is safe to use again. Okay, before I get to the browser I personally use right now, I want to talk about two others really quickly that I'm not recommending. The first is Brave, and I know we've already talked about how it's Chromium based, so that already axes it, but it's still super popular. Why? Well, it's because it's owned by an advertising company that is still eyeball deep in cryptocurrency despite all the ethical problems around that, and it can afford to market itself. So even if you do, for one reason or another, maybe for compatibility at work, need to use a Chromium-based browser, whatever you do, don't use Brave. Use de-googled Chromium or even Vivaldi in the case that you have no other choice. The other that I don't want to recommend is Tor Browser. Tor Browser is a Firefox fork too, actually, and what with routing through the Tor network, it is so secure that it makes LibreWolf look like Hunter Biden's laptop. However, you shouldn't use it, at least on its own. Partly because it's really slow, but also because, unless you're using it with a VPN, your internet service provider definitely knows that you're using Tor, as does your government, and now they're rather suspicious of you. Best avoid drawing their attention until you're actually prepared to. So, okay, me personally, which one do I personally use that I give my gold star of recognition and recommendation? I use FireDragon. FireDragon is a fork of LibreWolf, making it a fork of a fork, which is very silly, but it's Garuda Linux's default browser. So if you run Linux, you can run FireDragon. It's basically LibreWolf with some of the crazier privacy settings turned off by default, as well as a bunch of stuff that lets it integrate better with KDE Plasma and Wayland Compositor, as well as just looking cooler in general. So, while the world of internet browsers is getting rather scary and evil, you do have choices. There's a good few of them, and they're actually really awesome. So depending on your needs, check out LibreWolf, if you're a privacy nut, WaterFox, if you just want a solid privacy-respecting and ethical browser, or FireDragon, if you're somewhere in between the two and happen to be running Linux. And that's it for this first episode of Ethical Consumption. As always, I'm only doing this for the attention, so please let me know what you think in the comments. Upvote, downvote, subscribe, unsubscribe, do it. The algorithm requires it of you.